Latvia. Our next presenter is Rudi Tielemans, and his subject is: what does the new European Union medical device regulation mean to health software? A couple of words about Rudi. Mr. Tielemans is the founder and chief executive officer of UniWeb, and he has his background in sports science, medicine, biostatistics, and medical informatics. And over the last 20 years, Rudi and his company specialized in tailored web and mobile applications for both healthcare sector and also pharma. Mr. Tielemans, welcome.
Thank you very much. So indeed, my name is Rudi Tielemans, and thank you for the nice introduction. In this 1-hour session, we are going to talk about the regulatory requirements on health software. And I know it's the last session of today, and even that the topic might not sound very sexy, it might impact all of these fascinating things you heard about today on the MedTech stage. And now I'll try my clicker for the first time, sorry. Yeah, there it goes, sorry. So my goal today is to create awareness that health software might come with unexpected responsibilities. If you are involved in health software that you want to use with patients or that you want to bring to the EU market, you need to comply with some regulations. And non-compliance with those regulations might come at a high cost, including jail time. So what will we cover today? First of all, we look what is a medical device, and also when does software qualify as a medical device. Once it's qualified, we'll see how we can classify it. And then also what is required to bring the medical device to the European market, and also which standards apply for software as a medical device. You'll notice that in the world, there are different medical device regulators, and the applicable regulations might differ by country or by region. But there is good news, and that is that most of the regulators are members of an international forum to discuss further harmonization of the medical device. Sorry, I have problems with my clicker. Okay. So most regulators are members of an international forum where they discuss to further harmonize all the medical regulations worldwide. And in this presentation, we will focus on the European regulation. So in Europe, there is no central agency for medical devices. There is one, for instance, for medication, that's EMA, the European Medicines Agency. And also in the US, you have a central agency for the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration, that both cover medication, but also medical devices. So, but although there is no central agency in Europe, we do have a central regulation. And this regulation requires that you have a CE mark. At this moment, the Medical Device Directive is still applicable. So it was written in 1993, so it's 25 years old. And it will be replaced as from May 2021 by the Medical Device Regulation. Now, an important difference is that a Medical Device Directive needed to be translated to local legislation for each country. And only from that moment, it becomes applicable to all citizens and companies. But with the Medical Device Regulation, it's immediately effective to all EU citizens and companies. Another important thing is that the medical device regulation, becoming applicable as from the 26th of May this year, is much more detailed and much more demanding. And it is especially the case for software. Okay, let's look to the definition of a medical device in this MDR, the medical device regulation. So I will just read the beginning. A medical device means any instrument, apparatus, appliance, software, implant, reagent, material, or other intended by the manufacturer to be used alone or in combination for human beings for one or more of the following specific medical purposes. So if you read this definition, almost anything, including software, can be a medical device if the manufacturer intends to use it on human beings and for medical purposes. So it's very important that you note that it's especially what the manufacturer intends with the device that is defining it. And so the manufacturer will make a statement that is called the intended use or the intended purpose. Let's take an example. If you have a table, if you as a manufacturer say that it is used to have lunch, then of course it's not a medical device. But if exactly the same table, you use it or you claim that you want to use it for surgery, then by definition it becomes a medical device. And also other legislation applies. Okay, so the medical purposes, they are very broad. And they include diagnosis, prevention, monitoring, prediction, prognosis, treatment, and alleviation of diseases, but also of injuries and disabilities. Other medical purposes are investigation, replacement, or modification of the anatomy, or physiological or pathological processes. Also, the providing information via in vitro examination of specimens derived from the human body are considered in these medical purposes. There are also some special cases, and one example in particular is devices for the control or support of conception. So it's very interesting because even an app that you would use for birth control or to calculate the best time in the month to conceive a baby is considered as a medical device by the medical device regulation. You also have some exclusions, and they are mainly if the principal action is by pharmacological or immunological or metabolic means. In that case, it's not this regulation that applies, but for instance, for medication, there is a, well, it's a regulation by EMA that is applicable. Let's look at some examples. So this is a CT scanner, and is this a medical device? Well, CT scanner, it is a medical device since it's meant to diagnose disease or injuries. Another example is a knee or hip implant, and also that is a medical device since it's intended to use to compensate for an injury or a disability. So you see every time on the left side, you have the definition so that you can make the link. And it's just to become familiar with the definition. So a blood pressure meter, also that is a medical device. It's intended, again, the intended use is to diagnose disease and in particular to investigate physiological processes. What about aspirin? Is that a medical device? Well, it is not because it's one of the exceptions. It's a medication and the intended action is happening via pharmacological means. What about the cross-trainer? Is that a medical device? I don't know, can try to guess. Well, it's also an exception. And why is it an exception? Because indeed, also the principal intended action is via metabolic means. Then what about the blood gas analyzer? Is that a medical device? Well, it is a medical device, but it's a special case. And because it's in vitro examination of specimens. And for that, there is another regulation. So not the medical device regulation, but there it is, the in vitro diagnostics, too fast. The in vitro diagnostic medical device. Okay, and what about software? If you have a hospital information system that manages electronic medical records, would you consider this as a medical device, yes or no? Software is clearly in the definition. So I don't know, can I ask questions or feedback? Is that possible? Eva? Okay, so maybe you can just write it for yourself down. What do you think? Yeah? Is it a medical device, yes or no? And we will give the answer later. So when does software qualify as a medical device? Again, whether software qualifies as a medical device, it depends on whether the intended use defined and the claims made by the manufacturer meet the definition of the medical device as defined in the MDR. And so the intended use, it's a statement that is written, but you also have the collection of claims. And the claims can be done in scientific publications. So if you do research and you publish about it, then it will be considered as a claim. Also, if your company is specialized in a certain domain, this will also be taken in consideration. And also what you write in brochures, so all the claims that you make towards the broad public will also be taken in consideration. So it's a combination of the intended use statement and the claims that will define whether you meet this definition in the medical device regulation, yes or no. So an intended use statement, which is made by the manufacturer, it can be very generic or very specific. For instance, you can say, this app is intended to help you manage your life. That's very generic. Or you can say, this app is intended to help you a healthy life. That's a bit more specific, but you can even go more specific and then say, this app is intended to help you manage your diabetes. And so whether you stay generic or you become specific, make the difference between being a medical device or not. The same is on the functional versus clinical level. So very functional can be, the app allows you to monitor your daily food intake and calculate the amount of fat and calories you have eaten. Or more clinical already, if you suffer from diabetes, then this app allows you to track your daily food intake. And then you can become very clinical. If you suffer from diabetes, then this app allows you to track your daily food intake. And then the clinical part, it guides you to sustainably reduce your risk of developing diabetic retinopathy, heart attacks, and stroke. So you can have similar software, but for different purposes. Remember the table? The same is true for software. So you will see a graph here with on the left side, in the vertical axis, you will have the risk and horizontally the significance of information or intended purpose. And so they can be or really healthy related about wellness, well-being, general health, or really more disease or related to medical conditions. And we'll look to some examples. Let's say if you have a wellness diary where you record simply your memories. You can do it, you can have an app for that. But you can, with the same app, probably you can also track symptoms because it's a diary, you write down information. But if you say that it's a symptom tracker to better manage chronic fatigue syndrome, fibromyalgia, and migraine, well, in that moment, it becomes much more medical, and you will probably be subject to be considered as a medical device. Another example regarding, again, the diabetes. So you can have general well-being can be, you have a calorie counter to maintain your body mass index on your phone, or you can have a calorie counter for diabetes to reduce the risk of developing retinopathy. Third example is about a heart rate monitor. You can use a heart rate monitoring for sports, for interval training. But from the other side, you can also using a heart rate monitor to generate an ECG and to diagnose heart arrhythmia, which is the case, for instance, for Apple. And so they started with the Apple Watch, which is at the end now a medical device. In the beginning, it was not a medical device, and it's a very typical pattern that companies first develop an application with similar features and functionalities, but they don't make any claims regarding the medical domain, so that they can test it with a broader population to see if there's traction. And if it's a successful product, then they will go for the clinical claims. And why are they doing this two-step approach? Well, simply because if you want to comply with the medical device regulation, you have a lot of obligations, and it's a big effort. So there is an algorithm that can help you. So is your software a medical device? The first question is it the software a computer program? Yes. And then the next question is it standalone software, or is the software incorporated in a medical device? If it's incorporated in a medical device, then by definition, it becomes a medical device software, and the medical device regulation is applicable. If the software is standalone, then there are different criteria. First criteria is the software performing an action on data that is different from simple storage, lossless compression, communication, or simple search? So one of the criteria is that your software, to be a medical device, you need to perform an action on data. So if you have, for instance, a textbook for educational purposes, and even if it's a medical textbook, well, it will not be considered as a medical device because there is no action on data. If we think back on the example and the question, the health information system storing and managing electronic medical records, well, also there, only data is stored. And of course, there might be a search function, but there is no real action on the data itself. The data itself is not processed. So in that case, so in the example I gave earlier, that is not a medical device. If there is an action on the data, then the next question will be, is the action for the benefit of the individual patients? For instance, if you have an application that is applicable for all applications, so if you process aggregated data, for instance, to do statistics, well, that will not be considered as a medical device. So it's only when it benefits an individual patient. And then the third criteria that is important, and then we come back to our intended use, is the action for the purpose or the intended use defined in the medical device definition in the MDR. If that's also yes, then it becomes a medical, then also the medical device regulation is applicable. So this is a very easy algorithm that can help you to, to define whether your software can be classified as a medical device, yes or no, or qualify better, not classify. So this was indeed the question that we had before, and the answer is no, it does not qualify as a medical device since there is no action on the data, different than storage and simple search. And then another important note to wrap up here is, so again, the intended use is important and the claims that are made by the manufacturer, and it's really the claims that are made by the manufacturer that are important. So whether your software qualifies as a medical device does not depend on the risk for the patients or the users. It does not depend on how the software might be used, or it also does not depend on what the regulators think how your software could be misused. So it's only what you claim yourself as a manufacturer that is important and defining. So what we just looked into was, does your software qualify as a medical device? And this is always the first step. You should never go to classification if you do not qualify. So if you don't qualify as a medical device, you just stop. You don't need to go to the potential risks to users or patients. That's only needed when it's only needed when it qualifies as a medical device. In that case, you can go to classification. And the classification is in different levels. In Europe, conform the MDR, you have 3 classes and 4 categories. And so you have class 1 devices, class 2A, 2B, and class 3. And class 1 device are the ones with the lower risks, and class 3 is the one with the highest risk. Here you see a table that makes, it's a risk matrix, where that you have different axes. And so on the top, you have the significance of the information. And this information is somehow what would be the probability that if something goes wrong, that it has an impact. And so this impact would be the significance of the information, or the relevance of the information would be low if it's only to inform clinical management. Whereas if it drives clinical management, then it's considered as medium. And if the information is used to treat or to diagnose, then it's considered as high. On the vertical axis, you have the healthcare situation or the health condition. And so if something would go wrong, what would it mean? Would it result in a critical situation that you could die from? Or will it be serious, intermediate, or would it not be serious at all and just temporary? And in the medical device regulation, you have a special section about software. And it's called, it's Rule 11, paragraph 1. And it states the following. It states that software intended to provide information which is used to take decisions with diagnostic or therapeutic purposes is classified as 2A. And as you can see, that's also the biggest part. So it's the orange color. And this is the lowest classification. You could say, okay, why isn't there a class 1 for software? Well, 11 is at the end, yes, all other software will be considered as class 1, but in real life for a medical device, then class 1 is never applicable because you always have some kind of information processing. So it's always class 2A as a minimum, except if this decision have an impact that may cause, and in the worst situation, death or irreversible deterioration of a person's state of health. And in that case, it's class 3. And if this serious deterioration of a person's state of health for a surgical intervention, then in that case, it will be 2B. Now, I added some more information in this graph that can help you to better understand the different categories, and because there are examples. And so if you ever need to classify, then normally based on the information table, you will be able to figure it out pretty fast. Again, you're the organization that brings the software to the market, and it's a legal role. So you cannot bring health software on the market without that you have a. So what do we need to do when we want to bring the software to the market? And I see that my camera stopped. Okay, we continue without camera. So if you want to bring your product on the European market, you need to have the CE mark. And the CE mark stands for Conformité Européenne. It's one of the cases where the French still were able to use French terminology on the European level. And so this conformity assessment is something that needs to happen before that you bring it on the market. And for which market is it applicable? It's applicable for the whole European Economic Area, which includes the EU countries, but also the EFTA countries like Norway and Iceland that are included. And of course, now we have a special situation where with Brexit, where Britain is leaving the European Economic Area. But I think that for now that they are still adhering to this MDR, but I'm not sure. It's evolving. So you might have seen other devices that have such a CE mark, because in fact, every device in Europe should have a CE mark, also not medical devices. But for software, it's very atypical to see it. And so for software, it's only for if it's a medical device that it's required. And typically the location where you would put it would be in the about box. And you would be surprised because there are quite some software apps that already have this mark. And this is a link to a website where you can find an overview. And it's maintained and updated by a private company, but it's a very interesting source. Europe is also going to make a database, EUDAMET, but it's not online yet, at least not last time when I checked. So what are the other, so to get the CE mark and to go for a CE assessment, you need to comply to this medical device regulation. And we can decompose it in different aspects. And first of all, you need a quality management system. And also you need to comply with the general safety and performance requirements. And those cover how you need to design. This covers all aspects about safety, aspects about the materials and the packaging, and also the information supplied. Now, if you read the medical device regulation, there are a lot of requirements, but they are not always clear on how you need to prove that you comply with all these requirements. And for that, there are some standards that are what they call harmonized standards. And you can use those to prove compliance with essential requirements for medical devices and also for the organizational requirements. And so an organizational requirement is that you would have a quality management system. And there is a special quality management system for medical devices, which is the ISO 13485. And it's in fact the equivalent of ISO 9001, which is much more common and much more known. And so it means that if you want to develop a medical device or software as a medical device, you need to have such a quality management system. And the quality management system covers a lot of aspects on how you run your organization. It goes about quality policies. It goes about how you manage your resources, your HR resources. It defines how you design and develop, how you do quality control, how you measure any incidents that would happen, corrective and preventive actions, and so on. So it's let's say a whole system, a whole quality management system that defines how you organize things in your company. And so it results that you have, for all these aspects, that you have procedures, you have work instructions, checklists, and so that defines how you can guarantee quality and safety of a product that you develop and bring to the market. And then when this quality management system would get audited, then you need to not only to demonstrate that you have those procedures in place, but you also need to demonstrate that you follow these procedures. And this is done by having records and documents in place and reports. Another important standard, especially for when it's software as a medical device, is that is the IEC 62304, which defines the software lifecycle processes, and it includes software development, but also maintenance of the software. Then there are three standards that are more related to safety, and that is risk management. That's the most important one. It's a 14971. And so it covers, well, this standard is in place to guarantee patient safety and also information security of your application. And it typically starts with a risk analysis, and then you will implement risk controls, and then you will, at the end, define a residual risk, and then you can only bring it to the market, of course, if the clinical benefits would outweigh any residual risks. Two other standards that are supporting this risk management is a usability engineering. This is not about it's not the classical usability engineering as we know in UX design and so on. The usability engineering here is also focused on safety. And then you also have if you have a hardware device, then also the electrical safety and electromagnetic compatibility standards are applicable. And then the last one that is also very important is your security. So it's a whole set of standards that exist regarding security. The 70,001 is a very common one. And I would recommend, of course, if you would develop software as a medical device, to at least have that standard in place. Now, this is a very interesting graph because it shows, in fact, that all these standards are interrelated. If you read one of the standards of these standards, you will see that they refer to each other. So it's like a whole ecosystem, and they are all interdependent. A second important aspect, a part of the standards that you need to follow with the quality management system and then the harmonized standards, is that you also need to demonstrate that you follow those standards. And for that, there is technical documentation that you need to prepare. And the technical documentation consists of, it's a very large folder, and here is an example of a structure. So first of all, you need to describe the general aspects of your application. If you have subcontractors, you need to have your specifications, your intended use, critical components, all aspects of risk management. And you see all the time, you will see a pattern. There always needs to be a plan and a report. That's true for risk management, the risk management process. And the risk management process is something that goes from the beginning of developing a medical device for the whole lifetime. Even if it's on the market, risk management continues. But such a plan and a report is also applicable for the development. You also need to have a plan there. Then, yeah, point 8, you have the reports about usability engineering. 9 is about the software, where that, of course, you have software requirements, and you have software requirements. Then you have the detailed design. Then you have your test reports and the release notes. Sterilization is less applicable, of course, for software, but in the clinical evaluation we will cover immediately, and the manufacturing is also less relevant. But the labeling is. So for software, labeling is also very important, and you will see that they are currently also developing a new format on how labeling needs to be done in your applications. It's not released yet, but I know they are working on it. Then regarding clinical evaluation, so you need to demonstrate that your product has a clinical benefit and that it's safe. And so a lot of people think that if I develop a medical device, I need to do also a clinical investigation, but that's not true. So in theory, if you find enough existing evidence in literature that demonstrates that your product is safe and performant, then you don't need to do additional clinical investigation. So if you can demonstrate with existing information that you did yourself, or that you find in literature that the product is safe, performant, then you can simply make your clinical evaluation report. If you can't prove it with the existing information, then you need to do a separate trial, a clinical investigation to collect additional evidence. And so there's also an ISO standard for clinical investigation for medical devices, which is a 14,155. And of course, if you can demonstrate that your product is safe and performant, then with your clinical report, then of course you can go for your CE mark. And that's the last step, is that you will submit all this information to a notified body, which is a commercial company. So it's not an agency, it's not an authority, it's a independent organization, commercial organizations, that will verify whether you comply or not. So typically, when they do such a conformity assessment, they will check your quality management system. They will check your technical documentation because you need to demonstrate compliance. And if everything is okay, you will get your CE label attestation. And typically, they will also certify your quality management system. And on the right top, you see some examples of companies that are qualified to be notified bodies. So if you bring your software to the market, there is a roadmap that you can follow, and that is very typical. So in the beginning, when you're still in the research and implementation process, if you're still preparing, so you're doing research, and in that step, you also need to start implementing your processes and procedures. So in that phase, you will implement the quality management system. You need to start planning for your risk management, and you need to do your clinical evaluation. And you need to identify the state of the art, so of existing or similar systems, the survey of equivalent devices. And then you should explore what would be considered as sufficient clinical data to if you are able to make your clinical evaluation, yes or no, because if you don't have enough evidence, you will need to collect additional evidence in a clinical investigation. And in that stage, you can also already engage with a notified body. Then you can start your product design and development. And from that moment, you need to start executing and performing your risk management, your requirements engineering. You will do formative usability testing, and you will follow the processes as described in this IEC 62304. So the technical design, the coding, testing, and so on. And you can also already apply for a unique device identifier. Then you have a phase of the validation. So at the end of your product design and development, you should go for a freeze of features and also a code freeze, because then you need to go to validate. So the verification part is still part of the product design and development. The validation part is in the next phase. So there you will perform technical and clinical testing, summative usability testing. You will need to make manuals, and you will also need to prepare the labels that go with that. You need to prepare your documentation so that you can demonstrate that you comply with the general safety and performance requirements of MDR. And so there you prepare your whole file, your technical file, your clinical evaluation report, your risk management file, and your design history file. And with this information, you can go to the conformity assessment. So you need to write your own declaration of conformity and then submit it all to a notified body so that they can review both the technical file and the clinical evaluation report, and also, if applicable, patch testing by an independent lab. But that's of course less applicable for software. And once you pass your conformity assessment, you can register and submit your information to the EUDAMED database, and you will receive a single registration number, and you can go to the market. But then it's not finished, because once you're on the market, you need to keep monitoring the usage of your device, of your software. You need to report any medical incidents that would happen. You will need to make corrective actions. You need to follow up the usage. So you really need to follow up very closely if there are any adverse events and so on. Also, all the other documentation, as I mentioned before, all your risk management is an ongoing process. And also your clinical evaluation report needs to be kept up to date, as well as your technical file. So if you make modifications to your software, everything needs to stay documented. I see I have 5 seconds left in my timer, so thank you very much, everyone, for your attention.
Thank you, Rudi. Thank you so much for your profound and at the same time fantastically useful presentation. You know what? You may switch your camera on now. I don't know if you noticed that, but yes, everything works now. We just had to switch it off because of the connection. It was broken, and then you appeared and disappeared, appeared and disappeared. Returning to the question you asked during your presentation, there are actually 2 answers. The one sounds, it depends, and the other one, then it is used to detect some functions of the body. That was concerning the medical devices, right? I guess so, at least. Anyway, thank you again. Thank you so much. And
yes.
And see you some other time, in person or maybe virtually, we will see.